So to the media, records and their photos, questions can be fielded to the group over there, to Debbie and Matt, for media questions, and they will also field questions on that. Okay, so we're here. We're gonna start in 2 minutes. Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, everyone. Khudamida, damas and herring. I am Patricia Enriquez, speaking on behalf of Binay sa Holland Dobrela, a grassroots Filipino women's organization here in the Netherlands, standing in solidarity with all those fighting for justice for tens of thousands of Filipinos killed during Duterte's reign of terror in the Philippines. We want to thank all the journalists, human rights advocates, and guests who have joined us in today's press conference. We are here to call for justice for the thousands of victims of extrajudicial killings under the Duterte administration, to demand that Rodrigo Duterte be held accountable at the International Criminal Court for his crimes against humanity, and to urge the Philippine government to return to the ICC and cooperate fully throughout the entire process. From 2016 to 2022, Duterte waged a so-called war on drugs that was, in truth, a war against the poor. Over 30,000 lives were lost, fathers, mothers, children, breadwinners, all taken away in a campaign of terror. Their families continue to grieve, seeking justice in a country where impunity reigns. But impunity cannot be permanent, and justice and truth will always prevail. Duterte thought he could escape accountability by withdrawing the Philippines from the ICC in 2019. But what we are here to say, no one is above the law. No amount of political maneuvering can erase the blood on Duterte's hands. The ICC investigation must push forward. Duterte and his cohorts must be brought to justice, and the Philippine government must fulfill its obligation to its people by returning to the ICC and upholding the principles of human rights and international justice. Vandaag staan we samen om gerechtigheid te eisen voor de slachtoffers van de oorlog tegen drugs onder Duterte. Dit is geen vergeten hoofdstuk, maar een open wonde. Het internationaal strafhof is de sleutel van gerechtigheid. Duterte en zijn medeplichtigen moeten verantwoording afleggen. Geen gerechtigheid, geen verdict. We are honored to have with us today a distinguished panel of legal experts and advocates who have tirelessly fought for the victims and their families. Attorney Cristina Conti from the National Union of People's Lawyers, who serves as legal counsel for the victims of Duterte's so-called drug war. Attorney Gilbert Andres from Center Law Philippines, also a legal counsel for the victims and a human rights lawyer. Attorney Benji Aquino from Redress, an international legal NGO that focuses on accountability for international crimes. And Lian Jimenez, coordinator of Bayan Europe, who will provide us with updates on the movement's plans to sustain the fight for justice in the coming months. Without further ado, I'll pass the floor to our first speaker, Attorney Chrissy Conti.
Good afternoon, or good morning, rather. Good afternoon, good day, wherever you are in the world. I represent a group of victims in the Philippines, and I've come over from Manila last Friday, at the same time that the International Criminal Court issued an order regarding, this is the most recent development in the case, regarding disclosure processes and participation of victims. Of course, the more important dates for all of us would be March 11th, the arrest of Duterte in Manila, and March 12th, the surrender of Duterte to the International Criminal Court. But of course, for the victims, we've been on this case for more than 8 years, almost 9 years now. On the part of Rise Up for Life and for Rights, we submitted a communication August 2018, which included direct information about the cases of 8 victims. And this submission is only one of 53, as far as we know, communications submitted to the Office of the Prosecutor, which is why the court was compelled and convinced to open an investigation by 2021. And now that we're moving towards trial, and this is clearly in large part due to the arrest of Duterte, because the court does not conduct trial in absentia. We're now moving with trial, and with certainly a big deal of hope for the victims. For the victims, the arrest of Duterte was a pipe dream, and for a long time, they thought it would have been impossible, especially as this year he announced his candidacy for Mayor of Davao. Sad to hear that he remains on the ballot, but nonetheless, he will stay in detention. He must stay in detention here in The Hague to answer for his cases. So first, the ICC pre-trial chamber clarified in the order last Friday the process as to discovery and disclosure of evidence. The chamber made deadlines or gave deadlines as to the submission of information of evidence that the prosecution has to provide the defense ahead of time. In turn, Duterte is also being asked of certain information that would be important for the prosecution as well. And that would include, by April 11, 2025, his indication if he would avail of or he would invoke grounds to exclude criminal responsibility. Meaning, he has to tell the court right now, by April 11, if he intends to invoke insanity, incapacity, self-preservation, duress, alibi, and the like. This is in line with the processes of the court, and hopefully these are matters that are settled before the confirmation of charges set on September 23rd, and for, I think, 3 or 4 days after that. For the victims, of course, for Rise Up for Life and for Rights, it's been a long time coming. And for the victims, the order also indicates sort of an indication of how they could progress. Right now, the victims' participation and reparations section is being asked to provide proposals as to mechanisms for application and eventual participation of the victims. Of course, we look forward not only for the participation in the end, but as to contributing to how best the victims can participate. And while we understand that victims are not required to be in The Hague at any time during the trial, some of the victims are very much keen on coming over. This would hopefully not only show the world, but certainly the Filipino community here, that EJKs have occurred in the Philippines. It is a terrible thing to deny until today that EJK happened, that EJKs happened, and that EJKs are a hoax, as was raised in the Senate investigation in the Philippines last week. Hopefully, moving forward, the lawyers here and the lawyers in the Philippines will be coming together, and the victims and their supporters will also come together to move this case forward in the best way possible, most rational, most sane, and most intelligent way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Conti. I'll pass the mic now to Attorney Gilbert.
Good morning. I'm Attorney Gilbert Andres. I'm the Executive Director of Center Law Philippines and also an ICC listed counsel. Center Law has been representing victims of the war on drugs before domestic as well as international mechanisms since 2016. We have 3 calls. First, we want to call on the Filipino people. Let us not lose sight of this issue of justice for the thousands of victims of the Duterte war on drugs. Secondly, we want also to call our fellow Filipinos to respect as well as to unite in that call for justice, consistent with our Filipino value of pakikipagkapwa-tao. And third, for the victims of the EJ case under Duterte's war on drugs, we will present your views and concerns consistent always with your security concerns. And I think we can all unite as a Filipino people in attaining what we call pakikipagkapwa-tao and that spirit of mabuhay. Mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you, Attorney Andres. Now, let's go to Attorney Benji.
Hi, good afternoon everyone, I'm Benji. Just to give you a situation of my background, I used to work in the Philippines with them. Even before I came here, I documented cases of human rights violations and submitted representations to the VPRS of the ICC on behalf of at least 100 victims. But I've since moved here in The Hague to work with an NGO that deals with specifically international criminal law. The brief that I got today was to talk about human rights and the ICC, and that was a very hard brief because the International Criminal Court is not a human rights court. It's in the name, it's a criminal court. And as I was scrolling through social media, looking at what were the conversations that are happening, I would notice that they would focus on the procedure, that they would focus on the next steps, they would focus on the criminal aspect of these proceedings. And those are very important. Those are things that the victims have to know for them to be able to participate. But I just want to read it back in and remind you that the advocates started this advocacy through a human rights lens and a human rights narrative. So I just want to remind you a few things, the few human rights violations that the Duterte administration committed. Of course, we know that they violated the right to life by killing people. They violated due process and fair trial by planting evidence, by arbitrarily detaining people, wrongfully detaining them, denying them of counsel, particularly because of intimidation from police officers. Whenever victims would go to the police stations to get copies of their police report, for that report to form files that they could then submit to domestic courts, they will be intimidated and those documents will not be given to them, effectively denying them of their recourse to the courts. We also have heard of Public Attorney's Office, and I have very much respect for people from our Public Attorney's Office, but we have a lot of victims who would receive advice from the Public Attorney's Office to just plead guilty so that their cases, their sentences could be reduced. We have also seen violations of liberty and security of person when they are being arrested wrongfully. We have seen how children's rights have been violated also in the cases wherein children became collateral damage, such as the 3-year-old Micah Ulpina. We have seen violations of the right to health. The drug problem, although arguably is also a public health problem and it's not being approached in that way. We are seeing issues relating to the right to effective remedy. Again, they could not go to courts. That's why they have to fly all the way here to the ICC, because our courts are unwilling and are able to try these cases. And also freedom of expression and association. And I think the journalists that are in this room with us today would know better than that, of how it was so hard for them during those times. But in the context of the ICC, they are once again trying to impede the exercise of victims' rights through disinformation and harassment. And how does this happen? Through the disinformation, they are able to feed propaganda that the cases will not hold water. Through the disinformation, they are trying to convince the victims that Duterte will eventually be set free. And that's scary for them. They've put their hopes on this case only to be told that it will not prosper. We have received reports from local organizations where victims are already considering withdrawing from submitting more evidence to the case and submitting representations to the ICC because of this fear, thinking that their cases will lose in the long run. And this is something that lawyers could also be doing. That lawyers can only do so much as regards providing the correct information. We all need to stand together and fight all these trolls, no matter how many they are, in the thousands, in the millions, to make sure that the correct information would reach the victims and they would not be discouraged to participate in the proceedings. I would also like to take this moment to say that many of the rights that I mentioned, those violations, they have not been taken forward to the case before the ICC, which focuses on crimes against humanity of murder. But how about those who were raped during these illegal operations? I know, and I documented a case wherein a woman was gang raped by 3 police officers in front of her husband in exchange for that husband's freedom. What do we tell her? That her case did not make it to the ICC. And this is something that also we need to be thinking about. The ICC is obviously important in securing accountability for justice, but there has to be complementary mechanisms that have to be done. That may be through domestic courts, or maybe the United Nations, or any other accountability bodies. But this time, what I feel has been missing in the conversations that have focused on procedure and criminal law are the conversations on human rights, and the conversations on how victims are being left out. I would also not to disagree with the prosecutor. The prosecutor also needs to be strategic in which cases it would forward to make sure that it can make a strong case and secure a conviction. That is also what we want. But I'm saying that there is a need for these other cases not included in the charges to still also be addressed. They deserve redress, they deserve justice just as much as those victims of the killings do. Thank you.
Lastly, we have Lian.
Good morning. Kuya Mohan, magandang hapon sa mga kababayan natin. We've heard from our esteemed panel of lawyers here this morning how the families of victims are preparing for the battle ahead. We very much welcome the fact that ICC will be trying this case. And this is a rare opportunity that victims are given due process or due recourse, especially from a justice-depraved country like the Philippines. Para sa amin, mahalaga ang bumubulong na kaso sa ICC at ubos kaya namin susuportahan ang prosesong ito. But at the same time, we continue to urge the Marcos Jr. administration to rejoin the ICC. If his intentions to cooperate with the ICC are truly genuine, if his intentions are truly meant to serve justice to the victims of Duterte's crimes, then Marcos Jr. should have no problem returning to the fold and reinstating the Philippine government's membership to the Rome Statute. Nevertheless, we reiterate that the ICC trial against Duterte is indeed a victory for the Filipino people. It is a step towards justice, but key to achieving complete justice still lies in the collective strength of the people. Sa hanay ng Filipino community dito sa Europa, inaasahan din natin ang tuloy-tuloy na iba't ibang mga forma ng pagkilos at aktibidad upang magpahayag ng suporta sa mga biktima ng EGK, ng mga human rights violations, at ng drug war ni Duterte. At gayon din ang pagpapalakas ng panawagan para siya ay panagutin. As we speak, our kababayans are congregating in Brandenburger Tor in Berlin for a demonstration demanding Duterte be held accountable for his crimes against the Filipino people. Similar activities are set on March 26 and 27 in Brussels and Switzerland, respectively. And on March 28, this is Duterte's 80th birthday, various organizations, not just here in Europe, but across the globe, are preparing a birthday surprise for him. These are decentralized and coordinated mobilizations to take place in key cities all over the world. And this will be led by various Filipino organizations who will continue the call for justice and accountability. Here in Europe, numerous demonstrations and protests are planned in Paris, London, Brussels, and other major cities. And on the same day, we intend to launch here in the Netherlands a broad alliance of Filipino organizations, individuals, and solidarity allies across Europe, united under the call Duterte Panagutin, Hold Duterte Accountable, Justice Now. I would also like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the Dutch people for their solidarity in this fight. We willen onze diepste dankbaarheid betuigen aan het Nederlandse volk voor jullie niet aflatende solidariteit in de strijd voor gerechtigheid en verantwoording voor de talloze slachtoffers van Duterte's brede regime. De weg die voor ons ligt blijft lang en uitdagend, maar met jullie voortdurende steun en solidariteit zijn we hoopvoller dan ooit dat het recht zal zegevieren. We hopen jullie te mogen verwelkomen bij onze verschillende demonstraties, forums en misschien zullen jullie zelfs deel uitmaken van de brede campagne-alliantie die we aan het opzetten zijn. Bedankt dat jullie achter ons staan. Samen zullen we niet rusten tot Duterte en zijn trawanten ter verantwoording zijn geroepen. From the Philippines to Europe and across the world, we will continue to expose Duterte's crimes and hold him responsible. We will remain steadfast in our commitment to justice and accountability. Thus, we reiterate our call: hold Duterte accountable for all his crimes. Duterte Panagutin, justice now. Thank you.
Again, geen gerechtigheid, geen vrede. Thank you to our panel of speakers for your opening statements. At this point, we would like to open the floor for questions from the media. We encourage our journalists here to ask your questions whether online or in person, to kindly introduce yourself and your media organization and to whom you are directing your questions to. The floor is now open for questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Vandenberg from Reuters News Agency. I have a question for Ms. Conti and Mr. Andres, because we heard from Mr. Aquino that he has heard victims being afraid and possibly wanting to withdraw from these proceedings. Are you hearing the same from the victims you represent, and can you give some examples of the kind of harassment that your clients are suffering? Thank you.
I go first maybe, because Aling Sheila is our client. For the Filipinos here, Aling Sheila is, Aling means lady, yeah? Sheila. So Aling Sheila has been used by the their account as part of their narrative that the EJK victims are fake. They even used the term tanim EJK or planted EJK victims to diminish the victimhood of these people. Aling Sheila was in one of our activities holding the photo of her son. That son had been killed last year actually in a vigilante killing, but it was during Marcos's time. People were trolling her on social media. They were saying that Aling Sheila is a planted EJK victim. Aling Sheila actually lost 2 of her sons. Generally, in the war against criminality, these 2 sons had been arrested during the time of Duterte, and clearly she falls as within the category of Duterte's victims. She had every right to be there. And as been mentioned by Benji, there are a lot of different victims of Duterte out there. And it's not just the war on drugs. He had the war on dissent, he had the war on the tambay, he had the war against the COVID virus, and so many other fronts in his all-out war against almost everybody who didn't love him. But back to Aling Sheila, she has been trolled incessantly, and these online attacks have spilled over, and from what we think, have posed physical security threats. We have taken several steps to secure her safety, and I do believe that, well, yesterday she was at the activity. It's okay, you know, but she was at an activity, and in the next week we'll be taking steps to not only hold people perhaps accountable, those who've been trolling her. One of the videos that was put out saying that she was a tanim EJK, a planted EJK victim, had 2 million views within the first hour. And the attacks, written verbal attacks against her have included, of course, direct diminishing of her victimhood, but also gender-based attacks that, well, I don't want to repeat those things, but clearly vile. From what we've seen, Duterte has brought out the worst in the Filipino. Aling Sheila is but one of few Filipinas who have been, well, attacked. Among the victims, there have also been people whose photographs of their kin. So I think this is where it has hurt the most. When the victims come up to the public with a photo of their beloved. For several of our victims, their photo taken in from the media have been altered to show somebody else's photo or something else. Thankfully, we've had the news outfits clarify and show the real photo. But then these photographs have already gone viral. And with the faces of the mothers out there, we don't know how much of, in terms of security, how much of a threat
Convicted will still have
not only
assets.
Duterte,
We are already
supporters
hearing
would be.
that the Duterte
And
family
because of the fervor that he elicits among his
So if they
supporters,
don't have
know
those
how-
assets at
how
the
things
end
will
of
turn
the
out.
by the time
but
of the
would also like to
conviction,
point out that there
it's
have been
possible
other
that reparations
attacks
will be very small.
collaterally,
It would only
including
come from
myself,
voluntary
including
contributions from other
journalists,
states. So if there are
including everybody
CSOs
else who
listening
has
right now
support.
in the Philippines, asset recovery, asset freezing, asset tracing is very important to happen right now. The more we delay, the more assets will be dissipated and hidden, and it will affect the right to reparation of the victims after the conviction of Duterte.
Does anybody want to add anything else? The question again is it necessary for drug war victims to participate? And for relatives or victims who wish to participate, who should they reach out to qualify for the reparations as well?
So Attorney Gilbert and my group already have a group of victims we're assisting already groups of victims. There are several other groups out there assisting victims who have been assisting victims since 2016, 2017, 2018. If you are not a part of these groups, we are studying mechanisms within the Duterte Panagutin network on how we could accommodate your either request for information or request to participate. This mechanism, hopefully, we could work on when I go back to the Philippines. So there's a huge interest from lawyers in the Philippines to assist unrepresented victims. Right now, I cannot offer an email address or a number, but generally that would be the Duterte Panagutin network who is willing to assist unrepresented victims.
Do we have
I just add on the part of Center Law Philippines, we are ready to assist any of those victims who have not yet joined any group, and we're willing and able to assist you in showing your views and concerns to the ICC process. Thank you.
Yes, last question here, and then we have one more question from the online media presence.
Yeah. With regards to representation, because I understand that in the ICC you have the defense, you have the prosecutor, and you have the lawyers for the victims. So without discussing the legal strategies, how do you explain that on the media? By the way, my name is Joe Feltesori. I'm from the Filipino Correspondent Network. Thank you.
So when it comes to victims representation, in fact, the ICC is the first international criminal tribunal to put the interests of victims at the center. And it's really important that this is a victim-centered approach. Why? Because it's actually a quest for justice for victims. That's why there will be a separate process for the victims to technically participate. There will be a separate process for that, and for the lawyers to be appointed as the legal representative for victims. So that will be part of the process here in the ICC.
Just to add, one thing that we want to explain to the media is that in this case, it's the prosecutor versus Rodrigo Roa Duterte. The office of the prosecutor on one side, and the defense team with Nicholas Kaufman on the other. The victims in the Philippines, and well, for the Filipinos and the Filipino media, in the Philippines, the private complainant is represented by the prosecutor. If you have a private lawyer, that will stand in as a private prosecutor, acting under the control and supervision of the public prosecutor. In the ICC, it's a little bit different, that the victims can focus on their interests. Well, they may engage, if they choose to do so, in the prosecution in some ways, or assist the prosecution in some ways. But the focus of the representative of the victims will be to carry the interest and have the court hear the interests of the victims at all stages of the proceedings. And what would be important is not essentially your legal expertise or you may choose not to be involved clearly in the arguments as to the merits of the case. But what's important is that the court also hears the sentiments of the victims. In being a victim-centered court, this has been very important because in most cases, you lose that. And as was mentioned earlier, in pursuit of the most viable legal victory, quote unquote, there could be concessions. As was mentioned, amin laya, or you plead guilty just so you would secure an earlier release in the Philippines. That's for smaller cases. But clearly victims have to be heard, which is why they have a separate representation.
Any additional from the panel? No? We have one follow-up question here, and then we will answer questions from the media online. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. I am Marie Omani of GMA Integrated News, and I would just like to make a follow-up on the freezing of assets. What exactly are the legal actions that were already taken by the camp to ensure the freezing of assets of the former president and other officials implicated in the ICC case? And then how will this impact the pursuit of justice of the victims? And also on another note, the Vice President, Sara Duterte, mentioned that they will take all means to be able to bring back the former president to the Philippines before the elections, which is going to happen on May 2025 or right after the elections, because the former president is also running for mayor, and this will happen prior to the confirmation of charges hearing on September 23. What are your thoughts on this?
I'll take a first stab at it. On the asset freezing and recovery, I don't think anything has been done yet concretely, but there is this news recently, I think it was in the Malacanang. Officers were asked if they will cooperate with the ICC should the ICC order for the freezing of the funds and the assets, and they said that they would through the Anti-Money Laundering Council. So that gives us a bit of hope that there is a willingness to cooperate, and then maybe it's up to the local organizations in the Philippines to have that work stream started. So I think for now, our lawyers here are focusing on the prosecutions, on the legal strategies, but alongside it, these things should already be happening, because the longer we wait, the more assets are lost and dissipated. So I would say there is none yet, but there should be. The second question is in relation, maybe interim release. I think this is the interim release, no? I think I would leave the interim release question to Attorney Gilbert and Attorney Chris.
If there will be an application for interim release, Center Law, its lawyers and its victims are ready and able to give the views and concerns to actually tell the court to deny it. Why? Because the conditions for actually granting it are not there. There are still serious security concerns for the victims, for the potential witnesses. In fact, we have seen that online and in person. Secondly, Mr. Duterte, as stated in the arrest warrant, is still a very influential man. And we have also experienced and seen that, actually. So we will actually outrightly apply and state that it should be denied.
Okay. On that, but first, while speaking for the victims, as lawyer for the victims, we would certainly oppose any effort for the interim release or conditional release of Duterte, because it would be very contrary to the victim's interests, as he himself poses a threat. And second, speaking as a lawyer accredited with the court, this kind of interim release that he seeks has not been granted by the court prior. In fact, the only other instance where the court has granted conditional release has been in a case of Article 70, or the fifth crime, the minor crimes prosecuted by the court, called offenses against the administration of justice. For the four crimes, main crimes that the court tries, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, genocide, and war crimes, no interim release has been granted by the court for any of those accused of these crimes. So, from my point of view, there is zero probability that Sara Duterte or the Duterte camp could bring home Duterte by May 2025.
Can I just quickly add, sorry, one of the grounds for the interim release that the pre-trial chamber would consider is whether or not it will be detrimental to the victims.